We will now enter into Module 2. So we'll focus on traceability and transparency as enablers for sustainability and circularity, going more in depth into the policy recommendation measures and implementers. And I would like to leave the floor now to Claudia Di Bernardino, a lawyer and also a consultant at UNECE, part of this project in the core team of UNECE.
Thank you, Francesca. So if we move now to the next slide.
Can guide.
Okay. It is not working.
It takes a while.
Okay, it takes a while, I'm sorry. Okay.
We will skip the poll.
No poll. We will skip the poll for a matter of time,
we
actually.
Don't have time at the moment.
But we would like to present you the topic of this session very briefly, because we already have been discussed the challenges and benefits. We had two companies, actually, that told us about challenges and benefits of traceability and transparency. But we want to discuss the role of traceability and transparency for sustainability and circularity and deep dive into the measures of the policy recommendation that have been included in the policy recommendation and they now need to be implemented. And this is happening already because we already received lots of submissions, so lots of sustainability pledge. The analysis of the scenario, the Footwear government scenario and of the benefit and the challenges was really the starting point of the policy recommendation. And we want to drive you today through the desk also and field research that we have conducted, specifically with Francesca from 2019 until 2021. And was the, let's say, the background of the policy recommendation. And also focus on the tools, but also on the key actors that need to implement these measures. Okay, so here, just a recap, because once again, we did discuss already the benefits of traceability and transparency for sustainability and for circularity. And the module is called Traceability and Transparency as Enablers of Circularity and Sustainability. Why? Because they actually are two enablers of sustainable value chain. They can contribute harmoniously and equally to toward the three dimensions of sustainability. First of all, traceability can represent a game changer to ensure social transparency. Since once the information is traced, once the information is made available, it's then possible for enterprises to recognize and identify, recognize the social risk in their supply chain and address them. Traceability constitutes also an effective enabler of environmental transparency, since it allows information related to raw material, but also to manufacturing phases, to consumption phase, post-consumption phase, to travel across a value chain and generate information. And then also it can contribute, generate information, deeper understanding of the product lifecycle impact. And then can also contribute to achieve economic sustainability. The implementation of traceability system is fundamental, can offer relevant economic benefits such as better inventory management, supply chain efficiency, better brand reputation and risk management as well. So there are really lots of opportunities, even for end consumer, because we know that tracking the story of a product will allow consumer to make more informed choices. And we have seen today that consumers are ready, Generation Z at least it's ready, as Guru told us, to take their part. And there are unfortunately not only opportunities, we have seen them, some of them today as well. And so we want to discuss them as well with you now, Francesca.
Yeah, and let me add that among the main advantages and the main benefits of traceability, we'll have a trust among all the shareholders and all the stakeholders that are involved in the value chain. And this lack of trust is actually coming from the challenges of traceability and the challenges that we have in implementing traceability. Let me just mention some of them. So the fragmentation and complexity of the business network, including the lack of common data infrastructure and common taxonomy. So we call things, and we also mentioned this this morning, with different words. So even the taxonomy is very important. The presence of various sourcing methods, Lack of harmonization in the regulatory framework, and we have discussed about this as well. The lack of mandatory public disclosure and due diligence, but we see that something is coming, so we just need to wait a few months probably, and maybe more than 1 year. Costs associated with the necessary resources and technology, including both human but also financial resources, technological barriers, and this is including also the scalability, the access to technologies, the limited amount of technologies that are able to cover the complete and the entire supply chain from upstream to downstream activities, the lack of traceability infrastructure, but also the data privacy and data security that we have mentioned also earlier on talking about circularity. And the risk of scrutiny, because every time you are more exposed, of course, you are exposed also to criticism towards the actors, so both brands and suppliers along the value chain. So I would say the main result here that we're discussing about is building trust among all the stakeholders, and we need to solve these complexities of traceability in order to build trust, a level playing field for all the stakeholders involved. So we went quite in depth actually in a mapping, right?
Yeah.
Of legislation and regulations.
Yes, we're gonna go there now actually. Yeah, here we go. So Maria Teresa already mentioned you that we have been analyzing plus then and under policy, regulation, and guidelines. They were mapped, different kind of instruments, different kind of documents. Also, we didn't we did not analyze only the sector, the garment and footwear sector, but we wanted to focus also on other sectors such as cosmetic, timber, minerals, agri-food. And we wanted to look at regulation that relates to that wide regulation or that tackle only one or specific sector in order really to determine the measure and the approach to advance traceability and transparency, sustainability, and circularity. And the result was a mapping document. So this mapping document is now available online. Maria Teresa mentioned that, so you will find it in the UNECE project website. And it represented tools that show you, that provide a picture of the policy and regulatory framework on traceability and transparency, and an asset also for connecting different stakeholders and also foster the implementation of sustainable development measures. So it can now be used by different stakeholders to understand, let's say, what is out there. And of course, this mapping will be regularly updated also because we know that lots of regulation are coming, especially are expected by the end of 2021 at the European level. And so from really, from these, all these regulations and policies and guidelines, it has been possible to discern trends in policy and legislation across the world. The analysis also offers us the perspective of what more could be done to set effective traceability system and to protect and to support particularly vulnerable groups and SMEs that need this type of support. And taken together, it is hoped that these can help inform the design of future policy intervention to address the main issues in the development of policy and regulatory traceability framework. We also conducted that field research.
Yes, actually, we interviewed 35 experts among different stakeholders, including associations, companies, of course, certification bodies, NGOs, technology providers, national government bodies, independent experts, academia, think tanks. Here in this graph, you see the quite fragmented, I would say, composition of the 35 interviews, but we really want to take into consideration all the point of views. And yes, actually 35 multi-stakeholder interviews focusing on these key topics, so the vision, the regulatory objectives, the needs and expectations related to traceability and accountability, distribution of costs, role of technology, standardization of reporting methods, and role of certification, indication of best practices, lesson learned, and final suggestions. So all this was considered for the work guiding then to the policy recommendation document. So in these next few minutes, we would like to really sum up the key elements that were then brought into the policy recommendation. And if we have time, maybe open a little bit the discussion with you. We really like that. Maybe a few questions we're about to ask you, and then we'll go to the next module. So I leave the floor to Claudia to start from the first key finding. What about due diligence?
Yes, what about due diligence? So yeah, first of all, once again, so this mapping shows that the policy, just in general, that the policy and regulatory framework is changing fast. And particularly at the European level, since government and institutions are increasingly recognizes the fundamental role of traceability and transparency across diverse sectors to accelerate the transition towards circularity and to empower consumers and businesses with more responsible consumption and production choices. So about these key findings, let's start with due diligence, because that's a very important topic. We heard of it already today. And the desk research provided an overview of the state of art of the framework covering human rights and environmental due diligence. And what the mapping shows is that there are international principles and guidelines on due diligence. There are also legislation at the EU level as well as at other non-EU jurisdiction that require mandatory transparency or mandatory due diligence for enterprises. And there are also new proposals of legislation at national level. But harmonized policies at the international and actually national level are needed in order to create a level playing field on both enterprises across jurisdiction and on access to remedies for victims of corporate human rights and environmental violation. And an important step in this direction, because this is something that is actually missing to have something harmonized, is now was taken by the European Union, since we know that by the end of 2021, it will be adopted a European Union-wide legislation on mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. We have another important point that we touched a lot already today, that is the one related to circularity. Here again, talking about legislation, there is a lot that is happening, starting from the European Green Deal of 2019 and the new Circular Economy Action Plan of 2020. And now, as mentioned before, we are expecting the textile strategy by the end of 2021. So we will have this strategy that addresses specifically textiles, first of all, and that will introduce provision on traceability and transparency in the garment and footwear sector. So about sustainability claims, that's another important point. And once again, here, European institutions have put in place many initiatives to substantially claim to provide consumers with trustworthy information, clear, trustworthy, easy to understand, verifiable information, to empower consumers to more sustainable consumption, and to incentivize also businesses to make products in a more sustainable way. And among these initiatives, once again, the European Textile Strategy, but also the European Initiative on Substantiated Green Claims and many others. Key action are needed anyway, the adoption of standard on the methodology, guidelines on sustainability claims. So there is a lot of needs that come actually from the industry. And now we need to see how the legislator will reflect these needs. Digitalization is another important point. Digitalization can play a key role in tracking and tracing the journey of product and processes, and to make the result data securely accessible and reliable. And here, again, the Circular Economy Action Plan, the digital strategy, there are many documents at the European level that underline the importance of digitalization, and particularly the importance of blockchain. That is a technology that UNECE decided to use within this project. And right now, the European institutions are really putting a focus on blockchain as a technology for traceability and transparency of value chain. And now, if we want to move on the other, yes.
So incentives, in terms of the main findings, again, from the research for the policy recommendation document, most of the experts confirm the relevance of, especially as we may expect, of financial incentives, especially the ones supporting technological innovation, infrastructural investment, pilot projects, direct incentives for interoperable solutions and digitalization, but also green and responsible public procurement, and also a premium paid to traceable raw materials was mentioned as one of the possible incentives. Among other incentives, experts also mentioned public visibility, positive and negative, of course, so both B2B and B2C, technical support, including training and education, faster custom clearance, and technology transfer. Incentives may also be adapted, of course, to different types of enterprises, especially in support of SMEs, and will dedicate attention to SMEs and also vulnerable groups, small farmers, and other representatives of the small vulnerable groups, such as women, young workers, and home-based and migrant workers in Module 4. So this is going to be very soon, later on today. Basically, this is in terms of incentives, but another key finding was related to the multi-stakeholder initiatives, and they have been pointed out by the interviews as an essential measure, collaborative initiatives that seek to achieve industry-wide change to create shared value for all the industry stakeholders. This will be and should be inclusive, benefiting especially the SMEs and the vulnerable groups, and at the same time addressing garment and footwear value chain sustainability risks and impacts. Technical support, training and education was another important key finding. They're fundamental, especially in traceability, considering the needs of SMEs and informal workers and vulnerable groups. Pilot projects and call to action was another key finding coming from especially the field analysis. So especially when we have new innovations, what we expect is actually to test these new innovations and pilot projects, just like the ones that we have in the UNECE project are crucial. And finally, SMEs, informal actors, and vulnerable groups, so to have a specific flexibility in implementing the measures for the SMEs and vulnerable groups was another key finding, and we'll go more in depth into that on Module 4.
Yes.
All right, so depending on the time that we have available, which is about 10 minutes, we'll make it. We can probably go a little bit more in depth into each measure and also open the discussion with the audience. This is something that at this point of the day
it's important to do. Yeah.
Yes, we would like to do.
Yes,
and we always encourage to use the chat and to share also the questions to the speakers.
Yes, we definitely have an incredible audience today, so a good opportunity to talk with all of you and to discuss with you how to concretely implement these measures that were already presented by Maria Teresa. So we have 5 clusters. The first is on policy action, norms and standards. That we have a very important one on incentives that could be financial and non-financial, as Francesca was mentioning. We have research and development in innovation, awareness and education, and finally, multi-stakeholder collaborative initiatives. As you can see, this match actually with our research, with the result of the desk and field research. So have been included in the policy recommendation, the main findings of the desk and field research that was conducted for more than a year. Moving to the next slide, what we would like really to do will be to open the discussion with you, as Francesca was saying. So the first measure of the policy recommendation is the one that asks for policy action, norms, and standards. So really the important to establish traceability and transparency policy and regulatory framework in the sector, to set harmonized traceability requirements, to avoid misleading practices, to improve interoperability and transparency of garment and textile value chain. And that's because policy and legislation represent a key driver for advancing traceability and transparency. And so compliance with national and international regulatory requirements or guidelines and common criteria for measuring and evaluating sustainability performance, along with an effective audit system for compliance and alerting on violation, it can be considered as a priority for companies that often also stress the importance of financial and non-financial incentives, support to research and development, and training for skill development. So we list here policy actions that could be taken into consideration by government, and in particular, the creation of a common standard on traceability, financial incentive, the introduction of binding labeling requirements, but also put in place provision or a legislation in order to stronger the protection against false and misleading information on sustainability claim. This will be a key point, actually, of the new consumer agenda of 2021. And again, the development, the strengthening of extended producer responsibility scheme, measure to facilitate access to market, and this especially for SMEs, preferential tariff for fair and sustainable products, but also green public procurement. Many are actually the policy action that could be put in place by government. So what we would like to know is, in your opinion, which are the action that government should put in place, which are the most needed in the implementation of traceability system in order to enhance sustainable production and consumption in the garment and footwear sector. And we would like to ask to the audience that is here, but also we would like who is participating virtually to
write in the chat.
To write in the chat if they want to. If someone wants to address this question. Mauro, for instance.
It's a cold call, Mauro, because before you actually talked about this
That's
topic.
why, because you talk a lot about what is going to happen, our Christmas present. So now we would like to see more in deep, what do you believe in terms of action, what government should do? Probably you need a microphone, please. Thank you. I'll put this back just to have a track of different possibilities that are being discussed actually by regulators right now.
Mauro can be the icebreaker. But,
happy to be the icebreaker indeed. I mean, it's hard to disagree with any of those.
Yeah.
When it comes to policy action, I think the question you put before, it's action to support the implementation. Now, many of those are actually requirements. And as we were mentioning this morning, we know that there will be a lot of legislation coming to enforce the need to exchange data. So this is happening in any way.
Yeah.
What we haven't seen is something to incentivize to make it easier. So on the one side, you have a pressure, but as a company, you don't know how to deal with that. So on the one side, anything which can help the harmonization, such as a standard, reduce the complexity, so it makes easier. And on that, I think it's great that we heard also from two companies, Vitale Barberi Canonical and OVS today, because they are in contact with the companies. So I think the call here is to be pragmatic and really ask the company on your daily life what makes it easier for you. And the other point, maybe it's about incentives. As we all know, there are a new fresh impetus of funds from the Next Generation EU. If you think about it, between 30 and 40% of the money, which is now being made available for all member states in the EU, should go for the digital and green transition. So anything which supports traceability for the purpose of transparency and sustainability should comply by definition with both requirements. The question is, what are the member states doing with that? Are they specifically foreseen this action or not? That's something which depends country by country.
Thank you. And do you believe that guidelines will be supporting in that sense? Since you mentioned the industry, the importance, of course, of hearing from the industry what they need. It's not just about legislation. That is true. So do you believe that also government should provide guidelines, especially for SMEs, anytime they put in place a new legislation, for instance, there should be guidelines on how to... Yes, I think you would like to have the microphone once again.
Guidelines can be helpful, but again, if you think about all the pressure the companies are now exposed to, you might have a lot of guidance, but you also need to have the time to read those guidelines to process that information. So guidance is necessary to harmonize, perhaps at multinational level. But again, if you try to put yourself in the shoes of the company, what is that they need on a daily basis? And again, I think those which are vertically integrated or they talk to suppliers, they are the best place to give really high added value advices, in our opinion, to the states.
Thank you.
Yeah, so if we think about Europe, actually in garment and footwear, 99.8 of the companies are SMEs, and so we really need to, we really need to think about who needs to implement at the end the norms. Yeah.
Let's go to the next.
Incentives. Yeah, so basically we understood clearly that we can have different kind of incentives, economic and fiscal incentives, both positive and negative, and also non-financial incentives. And we understood that non-financial incentives, at least from the results of the interviews, can be also very effective, and especially in the long term. So this is another result coming from the interviewees. So financial more effective in the short term and non-financial more effective on the long term. But then when we go into the implementation, and here will be great to listen also to the point of view of some companies. So which are the most effective incentives for companies? So let's say that tomorrow you need to implement the traceability for sustainability and circularity. So which are the incentives that are more effective and why? So also here we like to ask, of course, also to the companies that are here, and anyone, if there is a hand raised, the microphone will come to you.
We have Simone.
Simone,
that would like
thank
to take
you.
the floor. Thank you.
I have a mic here. I don't know.
Yeah, you already have a
perfect.
mic. Simone
So you
has
can
a
use
mic
yours.
already.
I don't know if you
Yes, we
turn
can.
it on. Okay. Well, I go to the good old-fashioned economic incentives. Okay. I think that we need to make a transition in our industry. So we don't need a green offer to make additional margins for our company. We need to replace our existing business with a new one, which is fully made of sustainable, circular products, etc. So this transition needs to be supported not only on the R&D phases, but also on the sales. So why not, I have a dream, why not removing or reducing the VAT on products which are made of recycled material? At the end of the day, those materials were already subject to a taxation in their first life. So why adding an additional taxation on the same material when you are using once again in their second life? So that could be a nice incentive, because it will imply a very good traceability system for the companies, because they have to demonstrate that that product was made according to certain criteria, and that at the same time it will boost the sales of more sustainable product for the consumers.
Thank you. Yes, so we'll bring this to the attention of the governments, actually. And what I will suggest, since we are a little bit of a lack of time, what we can do is really to suggest to read the policy recommendation, and also to go more in depth into the guidelines of the policy recommendation. And also we can anticipate that the results of the desk and the field research will be published soon also in a report that we'll share with all of you. All right, so
we have two questions to address, but I don't know if you want to move further.
If we can, maybe just one last, maybe the multi-stakeholder collaborative initiative, since we have been discussing quite a lot about this topic, and it will be nice to hear the point of view of the audience on this as well. So basically we understood that multi-stakeholder collaborative initiatives, just like the one that we are living in this moment, so right now at the UNECE SDA Bocconi event, could include a global open source knowledge platform to make guidance available to ensure the industry actors to receive appropriate training and information, different kind of actors, multi-stakeholder policy dialogues, pilot projects. So we'd like to ask again, so to the audience, on your point of view, which are the most important advantages to participate in a multi-stakeholder initiative in garment and footwear sector? So maybe those of you, we have a hand raised here, and it is actually a company of the Monitor for Circular Fashion, Marco. Vibra.
Hi, I would like to share our experience as Vibram, we are an ingredient brand, and doing something like a multi-stakeholder initiative help us a lot in terms of, cooperation. One of the SDGs is, of course, cooperation, but sharing knowledge, sharing the best practice, we really believe can bring new standards or help the sector to become more clear and more precise on the standard. And understanding the rest of the supply chain, let's say, before us or after us, will help us to modify eventually something, or other people can modify, other company can modify something in order to bring all together the best advantage. And as we see here today, the sum of every contribution is really a lot more than the arithmetical sum of the contribution. Last but not least, in my opinion, is the fact of creating inspiration for other companies to join and to bring the message that things are possible if we are acting all together, because this little part of everyone is not difficult, but is little. If we do all together something, the result will be really huge. So, in my opinion, we are going from the if I interpret it correctly, the word of Francesco Perini yesterday, from the capitalism, competitive capitalism of the past to the sustainable capitalism of tomorrow, going together in cooperation and multi-stakeholder initiatives.
So thank you, Marco. And this is coming from the experience of the Monitor for Circular Fashion. Yesterday we presented the research.
Yes.
All right, one last question, I think, and then coffee break. Because,
yes,
on the
pilot project.
It's time for
and
coffee.
Then maybe for the other measure, I just wanted to mention on the awareness and education that actually that was a topic we discussed today, that it's particularly relevant, even if we don't want to address the question. But this is an important measure. That is the one that where we ask, the policy recommendation ask to provide information to consumer to make more informed choices and create awareness, also business awareness and consumer awareness. So I think this is actually a very important measure, but we will discuss that and one of the tools that are the sustainability claims during another module. So we will probably address this topic as well, one of the tools that is possible to develop in order to have awareness and education. So I would say we skip the question that is an interesting one, actually, on which one are the most effective tools to create business and consumer awareness. But we will come back in another module on this specific topic.
All right, so this is a moment for coffee.
I think it's a moment for coffee.
It's the moment for coffee then. Okay, so we will come back a few minutes after 4, I would say. So let's have a nice coffee. It will be served in Bar La Centrale, so the same one of before. So you can actually follow the people at the entrance. They will be welcoming you and they will be guiding you towards the coffee. So 15 minutes and a little bit more, and enjoy your coffee.
Thank you. Eccoci cara.